to the Scottish Affairs Committee as part of our evidence session and our inquiry into oil and gas in Scotland. And we're very, very grateful to the Oil and Gas Technology Centre for hosting us this morning, and thank you, Ms Cohen, for the nice invitation to come. Just for our record, who you are, who you represent, and anything by way of a short introductory statement. And we'll start with who other than Professor Kemp.
Okay, I'm Professor Ali Kemp. I'm Professor of Petroleum Economics at the University of Aberdeen. I've studied the subject of North Sea economics for many years. My opening statement is not revolutionary at all, and that is that we have to acknowledge that the North Sea is now a mature petroleum province. There is significant remaining potential, but it is not easy to fully exploit, and the challenge is to find the appropriate technologies and regulatory framework which will maximise the economic recovery.
Thank you. Ms Cohen.
So I'm Colette Cohen. I'm the CEO of the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. Grateful that you could all join us here today and use this facility. And mainly it's great for us to showcase this facility because it is part of a continuous investment by both the UK and Scottish governments in the future of the oil and gas industry. And I suppose as part of my statement, I'd just like to say that while the industry has done a huge amount over the last few years in making itself competitive and driving down costs, what we've really identified now to make it sustainable, technology is required, and an organisation like ours really becomes a catalyst for that partnership between government and industry to deliver a step change for the future of the oil and gas industry. So I hope that we can maybe explore that a little bit more today.
Thank you. Professor DeLue.
Yeah, my name is Paul DeLue. Great to be here this morning. I have over 30 years' experience in the oil and gas industry, predominantly working for the operator community. I now work at Robert Gordon's University, run the Oil and Gas Institute, but I wear a number of different hats as well. I'm on the board of the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. I'm the chair of the Oil and Gas Innovation Centre, a Scottish Government initiative, and I also am a regular commentator on the industry and advisor to many countries, governments and other organisations. And my kind of key opening message here is we have had 50 years in this industry, made an enormous progress, but I think the next so many decades are going to have a very different look and feel and shape to it. And I think collectively we can create an incredibly powerful North Sea, but it requires a different way of thinking, different ways of working, and certainly new technology and innovation. So exciting years ahead, but we're going to have to collectively make it work.
Thank you.
My name is Willie Reid. I'm Director of the University of Strathclyde Oil and Gas Institute. Like Paul, I have more than 30 years' experience in the oil and gas industry. Very pleased to be invited here. Just by way of a comment, the University of Strathclyde is very pleased to participate in this industry, have done so for the last 2 or 3 years, involved with the OGA, involved with OGTC and others. Very pleased about that. But my key message, I guess, is really that whereas MER is up and running, we've got a good tax and fiscal regime in place. The key issue now is for the technology aspect of the supply chain to be invested in and developed so that we can get exports and develop the domestic industry. Technology will play a big part in that, and I think that the oil and gas sector deal will as well.
Grateful. I just want to check that everybody in the committee could hear fine. There was an odd frequency. If maybe ask you just to speak up a little bit. I know you're just across the table from us, but if that would be all right. And I'm also just recognising I think we've got over 100 years' experience in the oil and gas industries sitting across from the table. So I'll just start with an opening question just about your view about where we are exactly. Obviously, we've been through the downturn and there does seem to be renewed confidence returning to the sector. What's your view about where we currently are? And also when you're answering that, we do seem to have some sort of conflicting evidence about how much oil is still to be recovered. I think we've got Professor Kemp telling us that there's 11 billion barrels still to be recovered from the North Sea, and that seems to range from anything between 4 and 20 billion. So in response to how you think we're going, where we are at, maybe help us just to understand, like why there does seem to be a disparity of views about what's remaining and what your view is about what we've still got to recover. We'll start with you, Mr. DeLue.
Okay, maybe break it down in two parts. One is the history and then the point forward. I think we have come a long way in the last 3 years. It's been a really tough time for the oil and gas industry. I think the industry has responded to what has been one of the most profound downturns over the last few years. What has happened? Cost has halved from $30 to $15 a barrel. Efficiency has gone up. Companies, and particularly operator community, is now back to profitability with a combination of really good kind of operational management and reducing cost, improving efficiency. And we see actually in industry, and particularly will start making some money again, and hopefully it will create investment. But that is kind of the response to the oil price. I think the second question, Chair, you asked about what is the range of outcomes. I think we have line of sight as an industry between what is already producing, what will come on stream in the very near future, and what is, I think, on our kind of collective books is to be done somewhere in the 9 to 12 billion barrel range. And Professor Kemp is absolutely right with that range. Of course, there's a bigger prize out there, but that requires higher prices, it requires technology, it requires different ways of working, it requires a collaboration in the industry which is going to be different than we have in the past. So the price, the future price is out there, and if we get it right, it will be a huge price to the UK, huge price to Scotland, but it will require a different way of working than we've done in the past. So great start. I think the next kind of couple of decades is going to give us an interesting new challenge.
Mr. Reid, where are we? How are we doing?
It's been an interesting few years. Is that okay? Yeah, it's been an interesting few years, and when we look at the crash that happened in 2014, the industry was absolutely devastated in the supply chain. And I look at comments and quotes by Robin Watson of Wood, who at the Offshore Oil and Gas Conference said, "The world in front is nothing like that behind us." Sir Ian Wood, "Technology is the be-all and end-all." Bob Dudley of BP said, "We need to look outside the industry for new technology." But when we look back at the developments of the last number of years, what we've seen is considerable increase in efficiency of the industry, the development and cost down in terms of OPEX 40%, CAPEX down 40%, production efficiency up 10%, and of course production, in fact, in the last number of years has, over the last 5 years, has in fact increased 14%. Now, in terms of reserves and in terms of where that actually goes, I have a view that technology will play a significant role in that. There are a number of figures that have been suggested in terms of where those prizes could be, but I feel that perhaps Alex is better qualified to comment on that at this stage.
Grateful. Ms. Cohen, where are we in all this?
I think I'd reflect Paul's comments as well. We have come a long way. I think one of the most important things the industry has done in the last few years is nearly re-baseline itself and reducing those overall costs. It's put us in a really good position. I don't think we can hedge against a growth in oil price. I think we have to find a way to be competitive and thrive at this sort of lower standard oil price. I think particularly in a mature basin like the North Sea, we have to find a way to be as competitive as we can to ensure that people continue to invest here. We have some major advantages. We have a very strong, stable and supportive fiscal regime. We have a huge and capable skilled workforce. And now these investments in organisations like the Oil and Gas Technology Centre allows the industry to partner with government in developing the next technology to really make a difference. As Paul said, we need to change how we work, but one of the biggest levers we can use is finding the right technology to make it sustainable and to reduce our costs. That does require us moving towards a more digitised industry, to go more towards remote operation, remote control, automation in general, a larger subsea focus in the future. And I think that sort of approach will allow us to not only have a lower carbon footprint, which is also required for us as an industry to meet the requirements of a low carbon economy, it would also allow us to be competitive. So I think there's that element. Technology plays a big role. Organisations like ours can help. I think the other part, how big is that range of opportunity? I think the reason you hear such a discussion is that currently we have about 5 billion reserves attached to pipe, which means already related to either well bores or facilities. It's really the range of the 15 billion of how do we develop them. That comes into the price, the technologies, the commercial agreements, the collaboration, our ability to create environments where we can reuse and recycle our facilities. So that's the work that the industry is doing now. We have discovered resources. We have to find a competitive way to bring them on board.
One thing I did notice is that the OGA's estimates include figures for expected new discoveries. And how can you accurately predict for reserves which have still to be discovered? How does that work?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer how you can, I'm not sure anybody is, how you can predict. We have techniques and we have a huge history. We also have a great understanding of the basin that we're currently working in. And I think using that information and a whole series of algorithms, you can at least make a reasonable prediction on what the remaining potential is.
What about these predictions then, Professor Kemp? Because I said you predict 11 billion barrels. Is that an accurate reflection of what you said? And how do we do all this?
Okay, so we published a paper which, for a $60 price case, rising only at the inflation rate, 2% a year, and with capital constraints still being there, between now and 2050, we came out with a figure of about 11 billion barrels of oil equivalent. So that's the economic recovery at that price. We also did it at $50, where it was a couple of billion less. In our update, we'll do it at 70, and I'm fully expecting it will be a fair bit more. But above the 11 billion, we had 5.6 billion barrels of oil equivalent, which we call the unexploited potential. That is, they were uneconomic at $60. And the challenge going forward is how to make a goodly percentage of those resources economic. So that's why I'm also saying that having looked at the regulatory framework, the tax system, that a key feature has to be the development of technologies and their consistent application. As far as the range is concerned, the OGA, they like to be quoted as saying, we feel the ultimate future recovery is between 10 and 20 billion barrels of oil equivalent. So that includes proven reserves, but also estimates of probable and possible reserves, and also undeveloped discoveries, which they do model based on all the seismic data and the leads and prospects as they see from the data, and that's the basis of their estimates. But the important point on the 10 to 20 billion is that there's no time attached to that, and there's no oil prices or cost attached to it. It's really just the physical thing. So we do lots of economic modelling, and so we were saying that between now and 2050, at a $60 price, we can see 11 billion barrels of oil equivalent being economically recovered, but that leaves a very substantial extra to go for.
Okay, great. Well, that helps us out. Just the last sort of general question for me to open things up. We had Sir Ian Wood in front of the committee a couple of weeks ago, who was helpful as always, and we went through the Wood Review from inception to legislation to the realisation of the OGA and, of course, the maximising economic recovery strategy. What difference do you think this has made to the prospects of the UK shelf, and what are your general views just about the progress that's been made since we've had this piece of legislation in place? We'll start with you, Mr. Reid.
I think it's made a significant difference. And when I look at the feedback in my regular contacts with Andy Samuel's team and Carlo Procaccini and the technology side of the OGA, there are a number of key parameters that have been met. But one of the areas that I get involved significantly in terms of introduction to strategy, etc., is one of the things they introduced was they asked all operators to have a technology plan. And I think this, again, is one aspect that I just wanted to make sure we covered, because that has led to an insights review, which was published, I think, in April, which, again, gave us a picture of where the operators were actually getting involved in technology. Yes, there are other aspects of this, and I mentioned the improvements, etc., the engagement, the encouragement, the collaboration. But I think that's one area when we look at that report where there's evidence of collaboration. 20% of the operators, in fact, get involved in collaboration with vendors. That's a healthy sign. 45% get involved in developing new technologies. There's a, how can you put it, there's a engagement message in there which I think wasn't there before, and I think that bodes well for technology introduction going forward.
Grateful. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, we're going to add a few things to it. I think there's a couple of things played out in parallel. First of all, I think after the shockwave of the lower commodity prices, I think there's a lot of industry self-help taken place. I mean, the industry had no choice but to reduce cost, improve efficiency, and get business back on track. I think the creation of the MER UK strategy, and particularly the OGA, has been a hugely powerful catalyst to kind of help the industry to kind of work on a more collaborative model, but also put a spotlight on what needs to be fixed. And I think the focus on fixing areas around the fiscal regime, fixing areas around how do we make sure we drive more investment, fixing the areas around how we drive more seismic, how do we actually get organizations to work, looking at area plans. The whole range of what actually a good regulator will do has been hugely helpful. So I think the combination of that actually has been really powerful. Then you can link it in with the creation of the Oil and Gas Technology Centre and other initiatives. You get a very powerful package what actually puts the UK as one of the real competitors now in the world in terms of its regime, attracting money and everything else. I don't think it would have happened without the MER UK strategy and the work done by Sir Ian Wood and others.
Grateful.
Sorry, I would just agree with that. I think there's one other element that has really built from the Wood Review. If you imagine there was 27 different sort of actions that we had from that, but one of the big elements, getting a strong regulator was key. Focusing on technology was key, and the other was focusing on our ability to collaborate more effectively together. I think the Wood Review shone a very strong spotlight on all of those key issues, and we've actually delivered against all of them through the OGA, the OGTC, and we even have a champion for collaboration in the industry now in Steve Phimister on behalf of the OGA. And we have a Vision 2035, which we also didn't have prior to this. We have a technology vision that's got 10 major challenges now being worked on by the Technology Leadership Board, which will be used by the industry. I think combining all of that, the Wood Review drove that and allowed us to get to the point where the industry actually submitted its own sector deal for the first time this year. A combined, aligned voice supported by both supply chain and operators in a single document. We wouldn't have done that, I don't believe, if we hadn't had the momentum created by the Wood Review and everything that's come since.
Grateful. And Professor Kemp, we know that there's the 6 key task forces that have been set up as part of MER UK. Are these the right task forces, do you think, or is there other things that need to be reviewed as we go forward?
Yes, in general, I would agree. The establishment of the OGA, a much better resourced organisation, has been a major step forward. The former Department of Energy and Climate Change was really under-resourced as far as the oil sector is concerned. So the OGA is better resourced. It has people who have a deep knowledge of the industry. As far as collaboration is concerned, yes, Sir Ian Wood highlighted how there was a non-collaborative ethos before, and one of the prime objectives of the OGA in facilitating maximum economic recovery is to encourage more collaboration. So some is happening, but remember the background is one where companies were competitors, both operators and licensees were competitors, and the supply chain, they were competitors as well. So collaborating with competitors is not so easy, and I see a challenge for the OGA going forward is to ensure that all the clear advantages of collaboration are realised, and that will require a lot of skill because, after all, the companies are competitors as well. So the OGA can be the trusted intermediary and discuss things in private and get maximum collaboration.
Grateful for that. John Lamont.
Thank you, Chairman. My question continues on what Sir Ian Wood told us. He stated that the current rate of exploration is disappointing. I wondered if you could maybe explain why it is so low and what needs to be done to drive it forward. Any takers?
Any? Was first in there.
In fairness, exploration is the sort of the foundation of everything we do, but it also has one of the slowest paybacks. So during a period where you're short on funds and prices are low, it's hard to drive that investment into something you're not going to see a return on for maybe 7 or 8 years. However, we all do know it's the foundation on which we grow, and so companies continue to try and find competitive exploration opportunities. One of the areas that we're looking at is how do you make that more competitive? So there is a need to try and help drive the costs down in exploration. Exploration wells have become incredibly expensive over the last 10 years. We need to find a way to bring that cost down and also to reduce the uncertainty around what you find. So believe it or not, things like the digital advancements are hugely helpful. This concept where industry is now starting to share their data, so you have a much broader wealth of data, allows you to apply big data and machine learning and artificial intelligence to try and help us find those next opportunities, but also reduce the uncertainty around those opportunities. So there's work ongoing to try and increase our potential and the opportunities we will find in exploration, but it'll take a little bit of time.
Can I? Yes, please. Okay, Chair. Maybe a few things to note is that it is both the volume of exploration and the quality. So if I go back a few years, we kind of produced 10, 11 times more than we found. Actually, last year, we produced twice as much as we found. So actually, although we didn't drill as many wells, the quality of the wells were better, and actually we were quite lucky to find some pretty good prospects. So I do think it's a question around how do we get both the volume and the quality right. And I think a lot of work has been done by the industry and again by the regulator to make sure that if we think before we explore, seismic is made available, technology solutions are made available, and people have a better understanding before they even go in there what they have. How we drill wells and simplifying it, some great work done by, again, the Oil and Gas Technology Centre to drill cheaper and better wells, but also afterwards to give people almost instant solutions. Not when you found it, Colette absolutely correctly said this, it is a long wavelength to get it back on stream again. Can we give them some instant solutions of how to get it back on stream again? So I think we learned around its volume and quality, we learned around the process. And when I look at the difference between the 29th and the 30th licensing round, and 30th licensing round only kind of awarded a few weeks ago, huge amount of new blocks, new players coming in, exactly for that reason, to actually saying is actually we see a different element happening here. The building blocks are in place. So I think we need to give it a bit of time, but I think the ingredients are there to get a better outcome.
We're actually seeing, what happens in the curve in oil and gas. And at the end of the day, the OGA, when it was formed, indicated it wanted to lower costs of drilling by about 50%. Colette and her team have set up a focus on exploration and doing things better. That will take a bit of time, but at the end of the day, incentives of some kind may assist, and it's a combination of the drilling, where to drill, and there's also been a look at combining information and clusters, which again comes into seismic and all these developments and digital benefits, where you could look at an area where there are perhaps multiple operators and see how they could perhaps develop that better.
And last September, the Chancellor announced funding to explore or to survey underexplored areas. Just wondered what impact that was going to have and how that money was going to be directed into the most effective use.
I mean, I think it is great to see that funding has been available. Of course, it takes time, so it's early days. So, okay, so first money is made available, seismic needs to be shot, needs to be interpreted, and needs to be used. So I think there's a cycle of where it takes place, but it is always welcome to get a focus on monies in that particular area. But as I said, it will take a bit of time before we see the impact. We have seen some of it from the previous monies made available in the 30th licensing round, where actually some great initiatives came out of these activities.
Yes, the provision of seismic data from government should help. It should help small explorers in particular, where the cost of the seismic is a significant consideration. The main idea behind the provision of seismic data is that it should reduce the failure rate, increase the success rate. So the nation should benefit because of a better expected success rate. As far as the economics is concerned, if you're deciding whether to go exploring, well, of course, you'll be interested in what you might find. But also, as my colleagues have pointed out, it also depends on the cost. So the fact that the exploration costs have come down quite a bit is also helpful, and the development costs have also come down. So for a full cycle operation, we are in a bit better position now than we were when the costs were very much higher. So that's my basic position. There have been lots of discussions about whether we should have adopted the refundable tax credit, which Norway has. We did quite a bit of modelling on that, and it doesn't make such a big difference in the UK compared to Norway. In the case of Norway, it makes a big difference if you're an explorer and you can get 78% of the exploration costs refunded. In the UK, the corresponding number would be 40, and it doesn't make such a big difference. So the tax system has been adjusted quite a bit, and it is not really, I think, the main issue now. The main issue is really more on the fundamentals of the mature basin, and the policy steps which have been taken recently should be helpful. And in fact, I think the results of the last licence round were really quite encouraging. Given the circumstances of the industry when the round was launched, where the prices were lower than they are right now, I thought that the response in terms of willingness to drill was actually quite encouraging. Not very high compared to 20 years ago, but still in the present environment reasonably encouraging.
Thank you.
Can I just
Yes,
build on
please,
that?
Claire.
'Cause it builds exactly on the sort of where you started with your question on the government investing in something like seismic to try and promote or drive further investment. In actual fact, the success of the 30th round really was driven by not only having sort of data available about the licence that they were going into, information on the small pools that were already discovered on those licence blocks, a number of workshops hosted by the OGA, co-hosted with the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, looking at what would be the technologies that would unlock those potential assets. So this time, you have a group of people who've taken on a licence, who understand it better than they've ever done before coming into a licence round, know what it would cost, know how it could be done, know what their uncertainty is. So our chance of things actually being developed on these new licences is much higher than we've had on previous ones, because we've taken a different approach to the licence round, which I think is a really positive, collaborative approach.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Chair. That leads on to my question. How effective is the OGA's licensing approach in encouraging exploration? Sir Ian Wood told the committee that the licensing regime can lead to highly individualistic behaviour in the industry. Do you think the regime could be used to foster greater collaboration between companies?
I just suggested the 30th round has taken a different approach than previous rounds. We'll see if it delivers what we're hoping it will deliver, but the level of engagement of operators, big and small, in the whole discussion in advance of the round being sort of put forward for bid was really encouraging. The level of activity in the workshops, people's engagement, and that level of knowledge about the licence you were about to apply for was so different this time compared with previous rounds. This is really the test case, to my mind, of a change in a collaborative approach and changing behaviours related to that. So we will see, but what we've seen so far, I would say, is encouraging.
Any other takers? Alec?
I guess one point I would just add, a feature of this last round has been quite a substantial number of new entrants, some of them backed by private equity. So I think that there has been a change in that respect. A considerable number of new entrants, in fact, willing to engage in exploration. So I would highlight that as well, yes.
Can I make one other addition? I mean, again, if you look at the nature of the operators, and Professor Kemp already talked about it, Colette talked about it, they will be different in the future. We need to make sure we have an exploration licensing regime to reflect that. So they cannot necessarily afford to do all the seismic work, so we need to make it available. They don't have all the technical solutions themselves, so we need to make a technical solution available. They might actually need an area plan, an area connection. I mean, again, we need to make it available as part of a licensing round. So I think what is playing out, particularly in the 30 licensing round, I really like, because it actually drives a different outcome for the North Sea. It thinks about what we need in the future and saying, if we get ready for that now. So I think actually doing that kind of thinking ahead is really helpful to actually create a hugely competitive environment where we drive more investment, more activity coming in. Because if we don't do it, we actually don't deliver MER UK.
When I talked to the OGA last week, they talked about a data bank, which again, it's not the exploration itself, but it's actually the information that makes the exercise itself more efficient. And in that area, there will be a development of a data bank which will be used by various parties.
David Duke has got a substantial question.
Yeah, just always talk about collaboration. It's great to hear. Obviously, technology is going to be very important. On the radio this morning, I heard the oil price is currently about $75.5 a barrel, which is great news compared to just not that long ago. But the industry having been through price cycles in the past, you can probably guess where I'm going with this. How does collaboration help, or what else does the industry need to do to avoid going back to the bad old days and the same old wasteful behaviour that we've experienced when the oil price goes shooting back up again?
Thank you. It's nice to ask really straightforward questions. Fantastic. So I think the main thing is around, we've seen huge volatility in price. And I think, again, you picked up the oil price somewhere between $73, $75 a day. That's actually, that is today. We need to think about what's the long-term price. If you look at the forward market this morning, for the next so many years, it's more between $60 and $65 further out. So when you think about your long-term investment cycle, you need to think about what is the long-term price rather than the short-term price. And people are very conscious around this. We have had quite a big shock recent years. We need to make sure we learn from that, because some of the cost savings we have will be sustainable, some will not be. And actually, if we want to have a North Sea what works, a North Sea what competes, then we need to make sure that collaboration is part of our rule book. It's part of our DNA. Because if we don't do that, if you think about it, the UK is less than 1% of the world's production, less than 0.5% of the world's reserves. People have choice where they put their money. And actually, if we want to attract a disproportionate amount of capital and activity to the UK, we need to make sure there's an environment which is fiscally attractive, which works, has a powerful supply chain, has the technology provisions, but actually also make sure that when you come in here, it's an easy environment to invest in and deliver results. So I see collaboration as part of our DNA in the future, rather than something which was a reaction to price tag.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would also mention we have to look to this industry for the future and developing the supply chain and the skills, looking at digital, looking at automation, looking at artificial intelligence, looking at how industry and technology can be transformed. The way that it's not, the oil price is a market, which and markets go up and down, and we have little control of that. However, what we can control is the investment and the development in technologies and industries going forward that actually relate to our experiences in the North Sea, relate to where we can actually export, relate to the skill sets in subsea, relate to the areas that where we can develop competitive advantage. And I think that we really need to seriously look at investing and developing in those areas to help those UK companies to export.
Thank you.
Can I give an example of collaboration which could have a significant effect? So the remaining potential is, to quite an extent, in quite small pools, quite small fields. So one way to reduce the cost is to have a cluster development whereby several fields are developed with a common infrastructure, a hub. So that will often require collaboration because the different fields geographically may have different owners, and a lot of collaboration is necessary. So looking ahead, I think that cluster development with the need for collaboration to effect the agreement will be important. Also, of course, for the small developments, they want access to the infrastructure of pipelines, terminals, and again, to get more collaboration between the asset user and the asset owner is a challenge for the Oil and Gas Authority, which historically was a difficult one, but hopefully in this new environment will be more successful.
Thank you.
Ross Thompson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Following on from my colleague's question around about collaboration, one of the big risks, and I know it's high up on Andy Samuel's agenda, is that the industry goes back to some of those bad and poor practices of the past after the last couple of years when there's been more collaboration. So my question is, are we very much beholden to the companies to behave in that way voluntarily? Do you think that OGA has a role to ensure that collaboration continues? Do they have a role in ensuring that we don't go back to seeing more competition than collaboration? And does OGA actually have the teeth to ensure that some of that can happen? I'd be really interested to get your feedback on that.
So I'll start a little on the... It is a requirement really for the OGA to see that companies continue to show the right behaviours. Because as Paul already said, we won't deliver MER UK unless we get this collaboration, unless we work together. And as Alex said, a lot of the small developments really require a high level of collaboration, whether it's on the commercial terms or technology development or just shared logistics and shared resources to develop them. So there is a requirement for us to be successful that we collaborate. There is a challenge going forward that we're not mentioning, but I think we have to, that we have lost a lot of people and a lot of capability, and a lot of rigs are in cold stack at this stage. Even the warm stacked rigs are already back on. I mean, I'm aware of some of the drilling communities down now, you know, in Italy and places like that, trying to bring back on the cold stack rigs. That will drive price, that will drive a level of competition for those assets. As a result, that is the sort of thing that drives bad behaviour, or potentially. So I think as we move into this period in the summer where we have what we call the turnarounds, the shutdowns, where you get a lot of people quite quickly, a lot of resources quickly, where you might want to bring on, you know, good conditions for drilling. So again, you want your rigs on quickly. We have to be careful during this period that we collaborate effectively, we talk to each other. The OGA actually has a great opportunity as a trusted advisor and somebody who sees the bigger picture. Everybody talks to them. They know everybody's plans, and they can help and facilitate a greater level of collaboration and working together. Do they have the teeth? They probably do, because in fairness, MER UK is a legislative requirement for operators. Is that the best way forward for them to deliver using their teeth? Probably not. But I think there is that reality that, you know, it is an obligation for us to deliver MER UK. The best way we can do it is collaborating. I do, however, think there probably needs to be the odd moment of stick where you turn around and say, no, no, this is not how we want you to behave. This is how you can. I do think, again, organisations like ours, we've already talked earlier about, we've a huge amount of co-investment with industry. We are seeing that collaboration. So we're seeing those pockets remain. And we're talking about investment that goes between now and the next 2 or 3 years, these companies committing together to develop technology. So we're seeing the right behaviours, we just want to maintain them.
Can I interrupt very quickly, Chair? So, I mean, collaboration needs a coalition of the willing, right? You can't force people to be collaborative in behaviour necessarily. So I do think there's a real business imperative to do so, because although we reduced our cost base quite dramatically in the industry, not everything is sustainable. And therefore, again, if we don't want to do this, because it will be cost to everybody if we don't get it right. The other thing is, of course, the shape of the North Sea is different. Already my colleagues talked about a lot of new players coming in. We probably have a far more fragmented grouping of companies. And actually, if you want the outcome we want collectively on the MER UK, we need that kind of working together element. Now, how we wrap it up, collaboration, other kind of words, doesn't matter. It has to be done to give us the outcome. So, I mean, we all learned, it's my 4th up-down cycle, and I've seen it many times before, but I think we need to get into our DNA that this is different.
Sure. Thank you. Well, maybe just move on if that's all right, Mr. Reid, because we've got lots of questions to ask you and there'll be lots of opportunities. And Danielle Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to data, there have been a lot of programmes and projects on data, including the Call for Ideas, but to really drill down into the issue, if you'll excuse the pun.
Somebody had to say it, didn't they?
The OGA are taking steps to make more data available to drive exploration, yet some commentators have said that there's still a lack of transparency for some companies. Would you agree with that? And what data would be most useful for the OGA to make more widely available?
I can start by just covering a particular point that, again, when the Technology Insights review was done, it was found that there are 70 operators in the North Sea in total. When that analysis was done, it was found that there were 7 to 10 key operators whose approaches, technologies, developments, etc., were of a high standard which could in fact be transferred to these other operators. So that's an example. Clearly that data is proprietary to the OGA, but that's an example where there's evidence that there are benefits from data that's available from other parties being transferred. It's a question of how that is transferred.
I think we're seeing, a greater willingness of companies to come forward with their data. You have the OGA is becoming a great repository for that. They're starting to bring not only just from their asset stewardship survey, which brings just a wealth of data every year on performance, but they're also looking at this, the data, the CDA, which will gather other well data and seismic data. I think really then it's working out how to use it, because even then some of the smaller companies won't have the data analytics or the capability to take this huge lake of information and turn it into something that is actionable. So I think that's where, again, the collaboration between some of the key operators, because they can drive some of that, and the developers is really important. So the first thing is to stop treating data as a proprietary asset, that in actual fact how you use it is really where the competitive advantage is, rather than the data itself. We're starting to see operators think like that. And then it's now developing the right capabilities and the right applications to allow us to analyse that data, to learn from it and to turn it into real actionable information.
Yes, I mean, historically, the possession of data was regarded as something that could give a company a competitive advantage. And the idea of sharing liberally, historically, but wasn't really high on the agenda in the industry. Now things are changing. And the skill of the OGA will be to encourage more of it, and to encourage the idea that everybody in the industry will gain but by a greater willingness to share, because they're all part of the industry, and in some occasions one company sharing data with another might help the other company, but there should be a reciprocity. And a challenge for the OGA is to continue to do that, and they are the trusted intermediary, as it were, and they, more in private than in public, it can show how everybody is gaining in, say, a geographic area. If more of the data is shared, that enables better investment decisions to be made to the advantage of everyone.
Grateful. Hugh Gaffney.
What are the key bases facing Scotland's oil and gas supply chain? Does that mean is it stabilising in 2018, or is there any political pressure on oil and gas? Does that mean independence was 2014? Oil and gas was rising up, then suddenly it went down. So was there political pressure on that? Maybe it was about at the time.
I'm quite happy to start on that one. So you're absolutely right. I mean, again, what tends to happen, oil price goes down, the operator community pulls the handbrake in terms of investment and activity, and there's about a lag time, 12 to 18 months, before it hits the supply chain. So we see an absolutely big impact in the supply chain and kind of from 14, 15 onwards. And we see it both in the UK as well as in the export potential of the supply chain. Now, we have a hugely powerful supply chain. Again, not every company is affected in the same way. There are some companies who focus predominantly on the operating activity and actually have been continuing on driving more efficiency, and of course had an impact. But the ones who have particularly been quite badly hit is the ones who focus on capital activity. So it could be seismic companies, data interpretation companies, drilling organizations and others. Well, I think what we see happening now on the back of hopefully oil prices heading slightly more in a different direction, we see investment returning to the basin. And we see particularly kind of people looking at putting new money back into the North Sea, but of course then it will take a little bit of time to filter back into the supply chain. So we see the signals happening in both on the operating side and the supply chain side. I think the big exciting one, and Colette already mentioned, is around the future of what we want to do, and that's really around Vision 2035, because we see both a very strong future for getting more out of the North Sea, but also developing the supply chain to be a truly international, transnational supply chain, and doubling from what we currently do between now and 2035. So the supply chain is going to be pretty well at the center of a lot of the Vision 2035 activity. That means we need to have a healthy supply chain here, but also make sure that we actually help them to export to overseas locations. So tough time, things are changing, and I think we need to make sure collectively we help each other to be successful.
I think one of the other things we probably learned during the last few years is, and there's a number of pressures or levers currently going, but whether it's COP21 or some of the new legislation that's been introduced by both the UK and other countries as we move towards a low-carbon economy, is a requirement for the supply chain to also diversify. And not necessarily because the oil and gas industry, not in that it's declining in the UK, but more that it's going to be an energy balance that we see going forward. It's going to be a mixture of renewables and oil and gas, particularly through 2050, 2070. So I think it's important that our supply chain, which is highly skilled, highly capable, really heavy industry-oriented, diversifies into that broader energy delivery model. And that allows us not only to maximise their potential within the UK, but also maximise their export potential.
Yes, I mean, the supply chain is really the bedrock of the northeast of Scotland economy. And in the data, published data, it's not so easy to just show how big it is, because, well, we know the oil and gas production sector relatively well from public data. The whole supply chain is diffused. It covers a lot of areas in the national accounts. So it includes like lawyers and accountants whose presence here depends solely on the oil and gas sector being here. So it's difficult to understate, how important the industry is to the local economy. And going forward, it's encouraging that over the last couple of decades, the export activities of the supply chain have grown and grown and grown faster than the activity in the North Sea itself. And I think that there's every chance that that will continue, that growth in overseas markets, particularly, for example, the subsea sector, can continue. Of course, there are difficulties for the SMEs. For the SMEs to break into foreign markets, it's quite expensive. So Scottish Development International, these kind of activities to help gain entry can make a big difference.
I'll be very short in my response. It's really the engine room of the industry, and there's been so many mergers, and acquisitions in the last period, which demonstrates the serious nature or the serious difficulties that the industry went through. However, like all industries, it recovers, and there was a very good review indeed by Ernst & Young in January, which is worth reading, which talks about the whole supply chain aspect. What I would say is, again, something I would highlight is that wood had an industry which in 2014 was 86% oil and gas. Wood's industry is now 48% oil and gas. And it's involved in robotics, it's involved in the car industry, it's diversified into a number of industries in the States. What we're going to see are not just oil and gas companies supply chain companies diversifying into other areas. But one of the points that I feel very strongly about in technology is that we're actually going to see technology from other sectors benefit the oil and gas industry. And in Strathclyde, we have 27 new technology projects in the last 2 years. The majority of those are with oil and gas companies, and the benefit is actually coming from technology developed in other industries.
Grateful. David Ducat.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm fascinated to hear about this, the value of diversification, because across the northeast of Scotland, there's already been a history of engineering industry diversifying from the more traditional industries of fishing, farming, or supplying to the fishing and farming industries, for example, and into the oil and gas. And we've already talked about how important it is to be able to export that further beyond the northeast of Scotland. What can the government do to support this activity? That's either the UK government or the Scottish government.
Please, Mr. Reid.
Yeah, one of the things I said in my introduction was I was specific about the oil and gas sector deal. And I think that when we look at how we can develop this industry, that's actually a very good place to start. In terms of diversification and where things go, for me, as Alex mentioned, exports and develop of technology and develop of industry, it takes a bit of time. But the reality is we in Scotland, we are very fortunate to have a very good mix of talent in universities, high quality engineering companies. And also we have this huge advantage in the subsea sector, which again, if we invest in the right way and develop in the right way, there is great potential. And export is perhaps the most significant development. And again, I stress the sector deal.
So can I just... Really, I think there's a perfect opportunity for how the government, both Scottish and UK government, can help the industry move towards this, and that's been put forward in the sector deal. The sector deal outlines an underwater innovation centre which crosses multiple industries. It's not just about oil and gas, it's looking at aquaculture, marine, military. It covers the whole opportunity of really ensuring that the UK and the northeast of Scotland, which would host it, but it's actually connected to throughout the whole of the UK, creates a single one-stop shop for anybody in any industry to come and engage in the underwater innovation space. It also creates that opportunity for other countries and groups to come in again and be able to interface with the UK and all the expertise that exists here in underwater engineering, particularly subsea, because that's where we as an oil and gas industry have really excelled. And so our ability to invest in that right now, create that hub, create that opportunity, not only allows us to maximise economic recovery for the UK, but positions a whole supply chain, particularly the northeast of Scotland supply chain, for a long-term future in a diversified market. So you've got that. You also have in the sector deal a request for the Transformative Technology Centre. That looks at a low-carbon economy kind of technology for the oil and gas industry. Again, positioning a supply chain that will be able to deliver, not just in the UK, but globally, equipment and services that provide to the oil and gas industry, but deliver in a low-carbon manner. That is hugely valuable to both us locally, but internationally. So from my perspective, that's how the government could really help the oil and gas industry for the future and their supply chain.
Can I add a few things? I think it's been very powerfully put as an argument, but just in kind of how important this industry is. So roughly 1 in 100 people in the UK either works for the oil and gas industry or supports the industry. So hugely important. We just finished a piece of work on workforce dynamics with OPITO, which is a training provider for the oil and gas industry, and Robert Gordon's University. And if you look at the people directly and working in the industry, people work for the operator and supply chain communities, about 170,000 people, goes up and down. This is a 2017 number. Of that, around 10% work in the operator community, the rest works in the supply chain community. So if we want to make sure we have people doing high-value jobs in the future, this is critical. What Colette talked about, the sector deal, is absolutely critical to keep the capabilities and skills we have in our industry there for the future. So it is really important, not just from an oil and gas industry, but the energy diversification, leveraging our skills in other sectors. All the elements pretty well described in the sector deal are going to be key to make sure we kind of point to that incredibly capable workforce.
Can I just ask, do you feel you get the access that you require from government ministers? And do you feel when you approach them with these type of suggestions and initiatives that you get a favourable response?
I would say that through this process that they've been very supportive, and that BEIS in particular has really tried to enable the conversations. Where you run up against a little bit of a challenge is that the process is relatively new for the government departments in working out how to use the challenge fund, how to process the sector deals. They're a great idea. The whole industrial strategy is a super concept for the UK, and really working out how we're going to maximise economic recovery in all the different industries. But working out how you then as a government interface with those sector deals, support them and fund them, that is not as transparent. And so that's where the challenge is. Great conversations, but we don't really have a clear roadmap of how we go from a great idea, completely galvanised and supported by an industry, to a timely conclusion of this is how we now move forward. Because to ask the industry to move forward without knowing whether the government is actually supporting it creates a level of confusion. So transparency in that space would be fantastic.
Can I add like a footnote in the historic perspective? So it's very difficult to get figures on what R&D expenditure there's been in the energy sector, over a long period. But there was a former minister, Malcolm Wicks, who wrote a report after he no longer was a minister, which did have a table on R&D expenditure in all the energy sectors in the UK. And it's a few years old now. But the main point is that compared to the 1980s, in the recent decade or more, it's been very, very low. So that's both private and publicly financed R&D in the fossil fuel sector, as he called it. So what has happened with the establishment of OGTC and OGIC, that's helped a bit. But clearly there was a long leeway to make up compared to what happened in the 1980s. And so I myself would agree that the productivity, the national productivity gains from having more R&D in this sector could be quite substantial.
Thank you. Yes.
If you look at other industries, typical rates 3%, some even 7%, aerospace, manufacturing, etc. So if you take Alex's number, oil and gas is way behind.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair, can I just ask one
Yes,
more question on the exporting of the supply chain? In your opinion, are there any particular global markets or opportunities for the industry that the UK government, in terms of its future trade policy, actively pursue?
I missed it.
I was just asking if there are any particular global markets, in your view, that we should be focusing on as a UK government in future trade policy to capitalise on the export of our supply chain here in the North East.
So one thing the UK is extraordinarily good at is offshore developments, subsea developments, project management in hostile environments. And if we look around the world where we see similar type activities taking place, a lot of activities happening in South America, currently quite a lot of big finds. We see West East Africa opening up where there's big subsea kit going in. So I do think there's some really clear target markets where we can leverage our expertise. Now, credit to the Department of International Trade, credit to Scottish Development International, credit to some of the trade bodies. They are already pushing that. I do think if we want to make Vision 2035 work and we want to literally double our export potential, we have to do it differently than we do today. We're not staffed to actually across the industry or across government to do that. So I do think there needs to be a roadmap, a plan in place of how we're driving that export potential, leveraging it. So I think the markets are there, the willingness is there, our capabilities are recognized. What we now need to do is put a real clear plan in place saying is what's the specific request, what needs to be made, both of industry, government and other partners to make sure we set it in motion.
Okay, thank you.
Ross Stocks.
Thank you very much, Chair. That previous discussion actually feeds nicely into my question, which is actually around about the oil and gas sector deal. I've been working with industry already here to beat the drum for it, but for those who are listening to the committee's discussions today, can you explain exactly what a sector deal is, and from your perspective, what tangible impact a proposed sector deal would have, if approved, on the oil and gas industry? What does it mean for people in their daily lives here in Aberdeen, Scotland, across the UK to get such a deal signed off?
Great question. So, sector deal is something that is driven by the industrial strategy. It has been asked for by government to all sectors really to come forward with a long-term view of what the sector could deliver to the UK economy, but what it would take to do that. So where the gaps are, what's the potential, and then where are the gaps? So in the oil and gas industry, they've identified just under £1 trillion of potential value between now and 2035. Part of that comes from the Vision 2035 from the OGA, and then really the improved recovery from operators and how we apply technology and get that maximise economic recovery. There's also an increase in the supply chain. But then we looked at that further and said, what more could you do if you really started making sure that, one, you were here for a sustainable long term, you were really diversifying the potential of your supply chain. They identified quite a large additional value of about £500 billion. To deliver that, there were a number of things that would be required. One was the Underwater Innovation Centre that the industry believes will cost about £88 million to create. They're looking for £35 million from the UK government, and then the rest will be provided by industry. That creates a centre that will, as we've mentioned already, galvanise around underwater innovation in general. So not just for the oil and gas industry, but for renewables, for marine, for aquaculture, for military. So you really become this centre of expertise globally. That allows you not only to develop the right technologies, it allows you to deploy them, have expertise in services and expertise that you can export. The other was around the transformative technologies, where you're turning around saying we're doing a lot already in fixing today and trying to maximise economic recovery and investing in technologies that deliver that, but you now need to prepare yourself for a low-carbon economy. How do you ensure that the industry provides hydrocarbons in the lowest carbon footprint possible? So how do we ensure that we deliver the next generation of facilities that are carbon neutral, or even carbon positive if we can find a way to actually use other people's carbon in a positive way? So that's one of the other areas. One of the things that the industry is already doing is committed to a National Decommissioning Centre of Excellence, which is already being built here in the northeast of Scotland. And that allows us to try and minimise the cost of decommissioning to the UK sector and to the industry, while at the same time developing a technology sort of landscape or technology capability and service capability that is exportable. Because while we're at the forefront of decommissioning as part of the energy cycle in the UK, multiple basins are following us. So our ability then to develop the appropriate technologies and bring them elsewhere is a huge export market. So there's a number of other things within the sector deal that talks about jobs. So you're asking what's interesting for the North East of Scotland people? Jobs, sustainable jobs, high-quality jobs, the kind of jobs that the next generation are more interested in: remote operation, automation, robotics, data analytics, data scientists. So you're looking for that next generation of sustainable opportunities. And you're also looking for cultural behaviour, changes, and sort of a sense of innovation. So that's all packaged in a sector deal.
Can I add a few things? I think Colette powerfully described already, but it's maybe a slightly different cut on this one. So look at the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. There's about 360 million going in over 10 years, half from industry, half from government. Do the sector deal, there's probably close to £500 million of going potentially into the sector, which is hugely powerful. Now, how is this going to show up and going to feel? Actually, if you start thinking about it, that's exactly what we need if we want to deliver MER UK. It's exactly what we need if we want to do the energy transition, because all that plays out between now almost in 2030, you know, and the commitments about the climate change agreements has to go in place. So actually, if you want to get the best out of the UK, get the best out of the energy transition, get the right skills in place, that's exactly what needs to be targeted in terms of a sweet spot to go to, for the money to go into. And the reason why this is so important, you heard Professor Kemp talking about earlier around line of sight to 11, 12 billion barrels. By the time we get to 2035, somewhere between 7 and 9 billion of the 11 billion have been kind of recovered. If we don't do anything in that in-between space, we have an issue. And I think collectively we need to be really mindful that, you know, this is not a nice to have. The industry has been working very hard to get a sector deal to be done, but there's a purpose in mind to it. It is more than technology. It's about technology with a clear purpose to deliver both what needs to be done here, the export potential, and to kind of make sure there's a future beyond 2035.
Absolutely. You asked about impact, and big impact in the supply chain. And from my perspective, you know, the subsea centre, decommissioning, transformational technologies in particular, taking technologies from other sectors, taking the mix. Timing, I think, is very important. Now is the right time to do this. In terms of where the cycle is in the industry, it's absolutely perfect, and there's a momentum. You know, OGTC have done an amazing job in the last 15 months. And if you look at the momentum that's could be carried through, I think this could be significant. And the final point I'm going to make is that this is a hub and spoke model. At Strathclyde, we've developed many of those models, and probably Sir Jim MacDonald has spent maybe 750 million in the last 10 years in developing centres of excellence in these sort of areas, lots of experience. The reality is these centres are hub and spoke. So the expertise of other areas is distributed throughout Scotland and other parts of the UK, and that's important in terms of accelerating the programme where other experiences exist.
Grateful. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your very helpful answers. You know, as someone from Aberdeen, I understand the importance of the industry, but also the potential that it has still and the long-term future it's got. Understandably, across the UK, that view maybe isn't understood by others and other policymakers, as well as other organisations who will say, well, look, the UK government has already got a competitive fiscal regime, there's been a city deal investment, why should the oil and gas industry receive more? Now, I'm fully on board with that because I'm beating that drum. But in terms of us being able to take that challenge to others, how would you address that point? What would you say to them is the real benefit of ensuring we continue to get this investment when there's lots of obviously competing priorities?
I'll take from the point of view of the recent investment, which is really the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. And one of the things there is that co-investment with industry. And what you're looking for is at least a 50-50 commitment. What we've shown already in the first 15 months is we're getting way more than 50% commitment from the industry. There is that willingness to participate, but it's that combined risk and shared investment in the future. Because ultimately, if you're asking for any individual company to invest in their R&D, they'll become quite proprietary. They'll protect it. They've invested it on their own. Why shouldn't they? It's their IP. Whereas when you create environments like the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, it becomes shared knowledge, shared opportunity. It has an impact for the broader community. We invested in non-intrusive inspection techniques last year with a number of operators, which ultimately were proven and allowed you to save more than 200 million per year for the industry in the North Sea. An individual operator can't do that. So you need to create environments that allows the industry to invest collaboratively, but it really needs to be the incentive is that shared investment with government. So I think that, one, you're showing that the model works, so it's a great way of doing it. And two, if you look across the globe, if you look at the competitive index, right, that the World Economic Forum creates for countries, all of the countries that are at the top of the competitive index are all because they co-invest with their industries in R&D. They're all the highest investors in R&D globally. You can map the investment in R&D by a government against their global competitiveness index, which goes to the value they create for their population, the quality of life for their population, the skills and the education. So it all goes hand in hand. So for me, R&D investment actually creates a better nation. So it's making sure that you invest it wisely. And things like centres like this where you're co-investing and you're driven by industry needs, that seems to be one of the best ways that you can invest.
These are also industrial centres of excellence, run and looking at the market itself and seeing how things can develop.
Just before you come in, I've got a couple of supplementary questions from around the committee, so we'll give you an opportunity to respond to that. But first, Deidre Brock and then John Lamont.
Is John going on specifically on this? Because I'm going through another.
All right. Okay.
No, that's right. My question was about, we've heard a lot about the challenges of the offshore side of the oil and gas sector. I'm just wondering, in terms of moving forward and using the skills that we have in the northeast of Scotland, should we not also be looking to explore the onshore opportunities? And thinking of fracking and the very confused position of the Scottish Government, is there not an opportunity of transferring skills that we have in the offshore sector into the onshore exploration, which we're not currently maybe exploiting as much as we should?
So I'm happy to kickstart one. So the decision for onshore activity is a political decision. You know, of course, the skills are out there, but it's for the politician to say, yes, we want to do that activity. So I'll leave that to your wisdom and your colleagues' wisdom to figure it out. The question is...
But are there skills that could be used in that sector?
Yes. I mean, I think the skills we apply in terms of project management, the subsurface, all the elements around operations, is completely applicable to some of the elements onshore as well. So because a reservoir is a reservoir, it might have not necessarily subsea technology, but as an onshore technology, yes, it is being used. And remember, a lot of the supply chain activity is already being applied to onshore operations around the world. So we're already having a track record of doing it. Now, would I see that onshore being a powerful addition to the portfolio? Absolutely, because if we produce it here, we have jobs here, we have tax here, we have activity here, and we don't rely on import, and it helps with the balance of payment for the UK. But again, the decision to do onshore activity is very much in the hand of the politicians.
Do you agree with that?
I would just say one of the other areas that we're already exploring with the onshore guys is around technology, and particularly if you're going to work in an onshore environment, things like noise and carbon footprint become pretty critical. Water usage is also. So there are areas where we're already partnering to see what we can do to improve pumping and emissions and noise management. So I think there's elements there's skills already there that we can share, but there are also, as we learn new skills, we can share that too.
There's another important aspect as well, and that is we're talking about upstream. There's also midstream and downstream. In the refinery industry, many of the supply chain address the refinery industry, which is an onshore application. And the second thing I was going to mention, although it is onshore and offshore, is wind. Onshore and offshore wind is developing considerably, and the skill sets required in both directions are very close in terms of asset integrity, in terms of looking after these offshore wind facilities in the future. There's a tremendous synergy between wind and oil and gas.
So if the green light was turned on for fracking in Scotland, there would be a new seam of opportunities?
There will be increased opportunities for the workforce, for the technologies we already have, for the skills we already have. We've been fracking offshore for more than 100 years. So the ability and the skills are there.
Okay,
they can be used.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the B word, Brexit, and its impact. We've had evidence from the Law Society of Scotland, which says the Brexit issue, and specific to this inquiry, the Brexit issue cannot be ignored as it's an important aspect facing the oil and gas industry, given its highly regulated regime. And it talks about surveying the powers and that list of points where EU law intersects with devolved matters. And it mentions that the areas highlighted are complex, very technical, and do include energy. I was wondering if the panel could give us their views on what concerns they have about how Brexit might impact on the industry.
I'm happy to start. We've done quite a lot of work on the impact of Brexit on the oil and gas industry over the last couple of years. And again, it's a complicated story. It's evolving every time. But we looked at different components anywhere from the fiscal elements, from the legislative elements, what it means for people, what does it mean for supply chain activity, what it means for oil and gas production. And of course, there's complexities anywhere. What we certainly find if you look at the fiscal side, most of the fiscal activity is actually set by Westminster. It doesn't come actually from Brussels. A lot of activity in terms of ongoing legislation is actually sometimes developed in the UK, goes to Brussels and comes back in the form of directives. So there are a number of ongoing legislative requirements currently we need to think about, which of course are real-life cases. Where we see particularly the biggest issues on Brexit from an oil and gas perspective, please, I do not make a political point here, is around the potential impact between what is currently in place and going to the WTO tariff arrangements. And we see that is having quite an impact on the supply chain in terms of additional cost. And the other one where we're seeing is access to high quality resources, and particularly people who are the EU citizens or non-EU citizens. I talked about there's about 170,000 people working directly and indirectly in the oil and gas industry, so in operators and supply chain companies. Roughly 10% of that population is either EU citizen or non-EU citizen. So actually, and they are in high value jobs, and this industry is relying on access to equipment, is relying on import of goods and services, relying on export of goods and services, and on people. So the main thing, again, the industry absolutely needs, in my view, is absolutely frictionless access to it and continuous arrangements in place. The second reason why I think it's hugely important, again, for what is a live debate, is our Vision 2035 relies to a very large extent on exports and actually do more activities overseas. And actually we need investment, particularly in the next few years in the North Sea, before the North Sea potentially declines in production post-2020. And actually having investment coming in here, the less uncertainties of people saying is, I'm not going to wait to see what plays out, is going to be critical for the industry.
Right. Yeah.
I would say the industry is a global industry. So for all companies involved in it, they will find a way to make it work. However, what we have to consider is what the cost is and whether it impacts our competitiveness. I think the biggest challenge for the industry over the next year, and certainly one we're experiencing now, is the uncertainty. So, the industry is a global market. They'll make whatever market they're in work, or they'll withdraw. But uncertainty creates that, missed opportunity, whether it's a missed opportunity in investment right now in the North Sea, whether it's a growth in their current business, whether it's the ability to secure a contract in another country, because that uncertainty of what the terms may ultimately be in another year, that is the part that's impacting us, and that's the part that needs to be sorted out as quickly as possible.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? No. Okay. Jed Killen.
I think it's covered, Chair. Previous answers, yeah.
Okay. Ross Thompson once again.
Thank you very much, Chair. And this is the right place to ask this question, believe me. What role does technological innovation play in the oil and gas sector, and what are the most promising current areas of research and development?
Start. It seems to be the. So I will unsurprisingly say that technological innovation in the North Sea or in the oil and gas industry is of critical importance for the long-term sustainability of the industry and the long-term potential of the export market from the supply chain. More than anything, what we've seen in the last 2 years is our ability to reduce costs and become very competitive. As we have ageing assets, we're going to have to really stay focused on how you make those cost improvements sustainable. New technology, alternative approaches, whether it's drones, non-intrusive inspection, other techniques that allow us to be more cost-effective and not only more cost-effective in how we do it, but the kind of data and information we gather to be more actionable is really valuable to the industry and allows us to make our productivity higher. The other part that I think is really important is as we move forward, things like, so what kind of technologies are really going to make a difference? And they probably drive more towards the next generation of developments, as well as how we can make our existing facilities a little bit more competitive. And that's around our management of data. It's the analytics that we will use to be able to predict when we're going to fail, but also when we need to intervene and how our performance is being demonstrated. But also then looking at the next generation of facilities, remote operated, recyclable material, changing from decommissioning to actually reusing or just withdrawing. So rather than the big decommissioning kind of plans that we have now and the costs that are associated with that. How do we get remote operated so that you're really running from a centre more like this, a remote operation centre, you're only sending people out as required. Things where really that's attractive to the next generation, but also it reduces the cost, makes it more efficient. High-value jobs are being provided, and you're getting a much more continuous level of information about your asset and how it's performing. So I think the technology around automation, remote operation, digitization, robotics are all probably the thing that's going to make, and materials, make the biggest difference. And this isn't taking the man or the person out of the equation. It's getting the individual to interact with the information and the asset in a different way. So we're talking about co-working, not replacement.
So I think Professor Kemp was going to come in, or?
Well, I must support everything Colette has said. So when I look at the economics, yes, the technologies which can enhance the productivity of the operations must be at the top of the agenda. So, for example, we've had this problem of declining performance. The ratio of actual production to maximum efficient rate was a big problem. And that was one of the reasons why the last few years production went down. Now we're making progress and production efficiency is actually rising again, but it's still got scope to go further. And we can see in our modelling that if production efficiency increased to a worthwhile further extent, then there would be very big national gains. So that's an example. The other, looking ahead on decommissioning, we've talked about the new entrants who are often private equity companies, and they'll be in for a relatively short time perhaps, but we want to encourage them, and one of the problems has been the very high cost of decommissioning. So if R&D can make a significant reduction to the decommissioning costs, then the prospects for continuing new entrants with nimble-footed small companies would be greater.
I want to come on to decommissioning in a minute, but I think we'll stick to this, Ross.
Making that technology is absolutely critical. It really is looking at things going forward. Again, I stressed in my opening address that transferable technologies are very important, and I've got a list of all the areas where certainly very good experience of where this can help. And it's asset integrity, it's aerospace, power generation, electricity generation, grid systems, offshore, new ways of looking at that, data analytics, life extension, marine and offshore engineering, nuclear. We have good examples of nuclear where we've been working in Canada with the leading private supplier of nuclear in Canada, Bruce Power, where we're trying to extend the life of their power facilities by 20 years. And that analytics is transferable to oil and gas. Things like remanufacturing, which Colette mentioned, digital manufacturing, engineering design, applied physics, satellite technology, offshore wind, and catapult centres around the UK. The impact of technology really will have a big difference on this industry.
Thank you, Chair. You're absolutely right about how exciting the new technology is, and actually coming to places like the OGTC, you sit in a room like this, which is pretty cool. You see some of the new technology around about you. You're talking about remotely operating things. I've been here using VR. I've touched buttons on those screens, which I don't know what I was doing, but it's so interactive and exciting. And even when I came in, I saw a robotic dog. So this is a whole change in the way that people perceive the industry. So my question is that, and my colleagues will see this when they come to Aberdeen Airport, and I always make this reference, that you see the big felt new tech sort of billboard right across the car park, which shows the industry, the guys in their helmets and covered in oil and muddy and the rest of it. But yet there's this exciting new side of the industry. In terms of attracting people into the industry, who sometimes see it as this dirty industry, what more can we do to get the next generation of people into it? What more can UK government do, Scottish government do, and even here on a local level to make sure that we inspire young people round about the real potential there is in industry, particularly around about all the new technology that's being developed?
Can I maybe, if it's all right, start with that one? We did a big workforce study that we finished 6 weeks ago and looked exactly at this, around how do we get the new people coming in. Depending on which scenario, right? The different scenarios in the North Sea, if we just let it slow down, and it will be not a great outcome. But if we think there's some real opportunity here, potentially we're looking at recruiting another 40,000 people, replacing those people retiring, people moving on over time. So that's very exciting. Out of that 40,000, 10,000 are in new roles which don't even have a name yet. Yeah, Colette talked about robotics, analytics, etc. So we need to start thinking about, we need to make people excited about this industry in a very different way. Some of these skills will be industry agnostic. They can work anywhere supporting the oil and gas. But we are going to be a even higher tech industry than we're now. We're pretty high tech if you look around and you go and look at the new developments. But we actually need to start thinking about it strategically. We actually need to start recruiting people in a different way. We need to give them a different future. We need to tell you, you're not joining necessarily the oil and gas industry, you're joining the energy industry, you're joining something international, and that's quite an exciting prospect.
So I think it's much earlier. I think we need to really start thinking about how we educate our children. I've heard stories, particularly in the last week, even from parents whose female children were not encouraged to do physics because it wasn't, girls didn't do it. How that could happen still, I was flabbergasted. I mean, I know there was no physics allowed in my school because girls didn't do it, but that was 30 or 40 years ago. I kind of hope that that has changed, but it doesn't appear to have. So what can governments do? Absolutely look at your curriculum, look at the way we're teaching. We've got to stop having certain subjects that are for girls and certain subjects that are for boys. It shouldn't matter. It's about your skills and what interests you. With then things like robot wars, Lego challenges, they're really important because what they're doing is trying to get kids finding fun in science and engineering, because ultimately engineering is really just about solving problems. It's not about building big platforms. It can be sorting out your Adidas trainer. It can be sorting out an online programming problem, as well as building a great bridge or the next sports car. Ultimately, it's trying to talk about science and engineering in a different way, so that it's giving them an opportunity, a career in a hugely diverse, mind-bending kind of environment. And I think we need to start getting that across early and encouraging children to see engineering and science as an opportunity, not a chemist or a physicist. Or don't pigeonhole, you don't need to. It's a multi-skilled capability. And I think that's what we really need to start getting across. And it's too late to try and talk to them when they're in university or even in their last couple of years at school. We have to start changing the opinions early on when they're 4, 5, 6 and 7.
Absolutely. I think the key thing is that oil and gas provides transferable skills, in engineering. My son's in the industry. I encourage him to be in the industry. He loves the industry. When I look at, I think it comes from school, but universities as well. And I think that the encouraging thing is a number of oil and gas companies and suppliers have retained the graduates they took on in 2014, and I think that's very positive. And I think that we need to encourage that. And I think that the networking, I'd also like to mention the Energy Institute. I'd like to mention the SPE. I'd like to mention the great job that they actually do in the northeast of Scotland, where the Energy Institute has more junior members than in London. And these young people do join these institutes, and they do talk to universities, and I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Again, some fantastic answers. You should go to the Scottish Parliament Education Committee as well, I think. Just listen to the passion there. Lastly, again, tying into technology, we've heard very clearly how critical that is going to be to the future development of the industry and to maximising economic recovery. So right here in the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, we've heard that over 50 field trials, there have been 95 projects approved. How can we ensure that technology that is developed here benefits the UK? What is the risk about anything that's developed here being pinched by somebody else somewhere else? In terms of people here in Aberdeen understanding how this centre can benefit them, what would be something that I could take to them?
Again, great question. And it was one that really exercised us as we tried to design how you would invest and how you would protect that investment. So our process requires that when we invest in a technology, we do it with more than 2 or 3 companies at the same time, while we protect the IP of the developing company. And the reason that we do that is to ensure that what we're trying to create is that sense of innovation and the next opportunity, and really enable the supply chain. Taking their IP doesn't enable them. You really want to prove that IP. But to ensure that it gets deployed and that it adds value to the UK, you have to ensure that the knowledge of that technology gets broadly communicated. So everything that we do is then published. So ultimately, every project has a white paper. Most of them get presented here quite regularly on a Friday at 12:30. So we talk about the technologies that we have, we publish them, we share them at SPE events, we put them on our website, and we talk to different communities and companies about it. And that's important to be able to say, look, we've tested this technology in these sort of ways. This is how it works, where it works, and how you could apply it, so that you're trying to broadly get it out there so that the community will take it up. And then we actively encourage and work with the OGA to sort of ensure that this is a technology that fills a gap, they also help promote it so that you can turn around and make sure that it's being used appropriately in the North Sea. If the technology gets well used, it will then get exported as well.
Thank you. We've only got a few minutes left. I know there's a few more questions I want to try and get through, so we'll try and do it as efficiently as possible. And to start us off with that, David Duckett.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear the whole panel talking about the importance of education and getting in there early, getting in with the young people. We were down, the committee was at the Highland Show last week, where we heard exactly the same thing from the farmers. It's too late when they're leaving school. If you're not interested in farming or fishing by that time, then you're never going to be interested. I wanted to ask a quick question before I was going to go into my main one I was going to ask next, which was about, connected to that, as well as getting young people to join the industry. The ageing population of the industry was also mentioned. Are we finding ourselves with a gap where we still need to attract mature hires into the industry? And which industries are we looking at getting that expertise from?
So when we did our review, it's difficult to get a perfect age distribution, but the average age in the industry is somewhere around 42, 43, and has been there for quite a long time. And yet there are elements around where we're losing expertise, and we see that particularly as people leave the industry in circumstances we've seen in the last couple of years. And how do you replenish that? Because some of the people who have expertise might be on fields who've been there for 25, 30 years, and that is an expertise you're not necessarily going to replace very easily. We see people coming in from different sectors. We see people coming in, ex-military coming in here. We see people from other sectors coming in and joining the industry. The main thing is actually make sure we have an attractive offer where people saying is, I come here not to do a job, but do a career and have a transferable skill to go with it. So we will need to attract, as I said, when we look at our review, actually, if you, in the success case, and we're saying is we still need around 130,000 people by 2035, around 90,000 people are existing people we need to upskill and reskill to make sure they can apply the latest technology and latest developments. So it is hugely important not just to look at eyes on the new workforce and all the kind of attractive new fantastic gadgets. It's also to make sure that this hugely capable and powerful and competent workforce we have now get upskilled and successful to make sure they have the transferable skills and be successful in the future.
Well, the main question I was going to ask, and it applies to skills as well, but I was specifically going to ask about the transferring of technology between the oil and gas industry and other sectors. What are the challenges that we need to address in that transfer of technology and skills between industries?
I'll start with that.
Yep.
I actually see it the other way. I see more evidence of benefits of transfer from other industries into oil and gas. I see significant evidence of that. I would say that there's also very good evidence, obviously, of areas that are transferable from oil and gas. But the reality is there is now a blur in terms of how that can develop, and the market will decide that. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, the market will decide. And I think that the evidence I have, and the rest of the panel members may have a different view, but I see significant benefits of technology and engineers and people from other sectors benefiting oil and gas.
I'd suggest that technology is quite an enabling pathway for transfer of knowledge and capability between different industries. We're already partnering with renewables for trials on tidal to allow us to lower our carbon footprint on offshore facilities. We work a lot with the composites catapult, and that's because they've been doing a huge amount with the automotive and aeronautical, so we're transferring technologies from them. Same with the manufacturing technology catapults. The catapults are actually a real sort of catalyst to work with because they work across industries and allows you to sort of learn from what's already been invested in and to move that into your own industry and needs. One of the things we talked about previously is that ultimately what we're learning at this stage as we bring more and more technology into industry, that ultimately it's bringing it back down into fundamental science. These challenges are not about being unique or about oil and gas. They're about, rust. They're about heavy weight. They're about metallics. They're about heavy lift. They're about access. They're about data management. They're about digital. They're common to different industries, and it's just making sure that we align as effectively as we can, share that learning, and see, and sort of all you have to do is, under specific rules or legislation, make that technology fit your industry's needs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Leave it there, David, if that's all right, because we've got another couple of questions, then we'll be able to conclude the session. Christine Jarden.
Hello. I'd like to move, if you like, a step forward in the future and discuss the challenges and opportunities that decommissioning presents to the oil and gas industry, where you think they are and how the technology we've talked about can drive it down. But also the places like NIG in decommissioning. We've talked a lot about, if you like, the Aberdeen-centred face of the oil industry. But what about the other centres across the country in decommissioning? Specifically, what opportunities are there?
So the National Centre Decommissioning that we're creating right now with Aberdeen University will really more have a hub and spoke. In actual fact, we're creating a room very similar to this to allow us to be able to talk directly to other centres like Blythe, Fort William, NIG, so that they can be involved in conversations at the same time. So I think it's really important that you don't isolate you know, it shouldn't be just about Aberdeen or Dundee or Nig. It's really about an industry and how effectively it can work. So I think that is already at least starting. I don't think we feel isolated. It's just how effectively we can help connect each other we're working on right now. There's a big drive because of the OGA and obviously Treasury around trying to drive the cost down. We're looking at that right now, lots of technologies. It's quite challenging because ultimately to show a technology is working, how do you get the next version of a heavy lift when there might be 1 or 2 done a year, if that? So it's a challenge to actually develop the technology and prove it, and that's one of the things we're working our way through. But I think the other part that we really need to start addressing, both at a government level and at an industry level, is this concept that there is a decommissioning industry. There is not a decommissioning industry. Decommissioning, that's like saying there's an exploration industry. Exploration to decommissioning is cradle to grave in our industry. And as a result, decommissioning needs to be done hand in hand with the general activities of the oil and gas industry. And it's at its most effective when you're doing it while you have the skilled workforce and preferably the people who have the knowledge of the asset still around as part of the decommissioning activities. So we need to really start integrating decommissioning into business as usual and stop trying to treat it as a separate activity. And I think that's really critical if we're going to bring the cost down and we're going to be effective.
Just briefly, Deirdre Meehy has talked that some of the decommissioning is going to Norway. Deirdre Meehy talked about how it's just a small proportion of the value of decommissioning. Would you think more investment is needed to keep decommissioning in this country? What impact could that have?
I think we actually need to look more at the way we do decommissioning, and that comes back to, I think decommissioning needs to be part of the sort of general activities. The lifts, really, what goes to Norway, what goes to Holland or Singapore or whatever else is really when you have heavy lift. It's about 2% of the total value of the overall decommissioning costs. We are already very focused on like 47% of the cost, which is the wells. Lots of activity going on. We've got like 3 sort of different technologies, all being field trial, multiple field trials on them, looking at ways to reduce the costs around the well costs. But there's still that other sort of 53%, which is related to the facilities. How we do the facilities, we're very focused at the moment on heavy lift, on complete removal. I think there needs to be challenge on should we be on complete removal, how could we maybe do parts of those decommissioning elements while we're still producing. There's a lot of conversation that I think still needs to be driven in the UK. That may result in some additional investment in the right places, but I think a lot of our facilities that we have, like Nig and other ports, could take this if we treated it more as a bite-sized salvage operation. So there's opportunities there, we just need to discuss it. We don't have the solution yet.
Thank you.
I would add that all the issues related to decommissioning have been addressed in the UK far, far more than they have in other countries. So in due course, I think that the decommissioning activities are very exportable. And that's not just doing all the physical work, but in my area, say in designing systems for financial security, tax relief for the costs. A lot of other countries which have got large oil industries haven't really scratched the surface on all the issues there. Residual liability, what happens to the remains, what should be done about that? These issues have all been addressed here, still some to come to fruition, but I know many countries where they haven't addressed them, so it could be an exportable activity in the longer term.
Another area where we could export expertise?
I know Mr. Reid's coming in, but we are really almost out.
Very short.
Yes, very short then,
Very
Mr. Reid.
and that is that late life also is a very important part of pre-decommissioning, and that we have got the skills in terms of asset integrity and development that complements that.
Thank you. Deirdre Bock.
I'm conscious we haven't got much time, and this is kind of a big issue, but I wanted to ask about, and the panel has touched on it at times during the session, but I was wondering about how the sector balances the need for getting maximum amounts of economic return with the drive for a much lower carbon future. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about how the industry is actually creating a role for itself in the clean growth strategy.
I think at this moment it's the larger operators that, well, there's two ways of doing it. One, the sector deal has taken more of a strategic approach, and that's why they're addressing the Underwater Innovation Centre, which combines skills and working hand in hand with renewables. The transformative technologies are looking specifically at technologies that will allow us to lower the carbon footprint and address the clean growth strategy and the aspirations of both the UK and Scottish Government. So you're getting that at an industry level. I think you have individual, particularly the larger operators, that have some very clear and quite aggressive goals of preparing themselves for a low carbon future. You know, and they've put out those strategies, and even whether it's Statoil, BP, Shell, they all have very clear visions of where they would like to go and sort of deliver as an oil and gas company in a low carbon future. So I think there's work being done at different levels. And in different areas of operations.
So if I can add, this is, I think, a really good description of what plays out in the operator community. There's an equivalent agenda, of course, in the supply chain community. A lot of the supply chain companies are already looking at diversifying their business. You put a cable down and putting a pipeline down, very similar technology. Installing a platform, installing a wind farm, is, the installation itself is not dissimilar. So you can see diversification is already happening, and you can see as the market for potentially lower carbon and renewables business is growing, you can see the supply chain and the operator community are diversifying there. But we need to be really clear that there is a transition window. I mean, oil and gas will play a hugely important role as we look at the lower carbon transition. And we need to make sure that we're actually supporting both industry in a wide way to get the most value out for the country.
We're really going to have to leave it there. There's so many more questions, so many more issues to explore. But we're very, very grateful for your time. You've really helped the committee understand some of the key issues that we should be looking at as we go forward with this inquiry. And as always, if there's anything that you observe about what we're considering and looking at, and you feel you can contribute, please get back in touch with this committee. And we're grateful to you, Colette, for hosting us once again in this wonderful facility here up in Aberdeen. But thank you very much for attending today. Order.